Hello everyone, my name is Ahmed Qasim, and today I'll be presenting on FLUSH+RELOAD, a high-resolution, low-noise L3 cache side-channel attack. This attack is important because it demonstrates how modern CPU optimizations can be exploited to extract sensitive data, including encryption keys, across different processes and even virtual machines. Let's get started with some background on this paper. A side channel attack is a method of extracting secret information by exploiting unintended information leaks from a system. So, unlike traditional attacks, which directly break encryption or exploit software vulnerabilities, side channel attacks analyze the physical characteristics of a machine. So, like timing, power consumption, electromagnetic emissions, or cache behaviors. So these attackers, during timing attacks, will measure how long computations in the CPU take to infer the secret information, such as cryptographic keys. For power attacks, they observe how much power consumptions fluctuate during the processing times. Electromagnetic is very similar as to where they see how many emissions go off and reconstruct the data. And lastly, we have cache attacks, which Flush and Reload does, so it exploits CPU cache behavior to infer the secret information. Now, why do you guys think modern CPUs are more vulnerable to side channel attacks? So, to understand side channel attacks, we have to understand CPU caching and how they work. So here's a basic model of a CPU's cache. And in this cache, we have multiple cores, and then we have our main memory. The multiple cores make up the CPU. So the cores in the CPU essentially talk with the RAM, and these cores going from L1 to L3 affect the speed of how the CPU talks to the RAM. So at first we have the L1 cache, which is the fastest and closest to the CPU, but it's also the smallest. Then we have the L2, which is larger but slower. And lastly, we have the L3 cache, which is shared among all cores but is much slower, though every core can access the L3. So how does this work? When the CPU accesses data, it first checks the L1. If it's not found, aka cache missing, it moves to L2. If it doesn't find it there, it misses again and moves to L3, and then finally RAM. So data is stored in cache lines, but it doesn't contain a lot of data. If data is evicted from the L3 cache, it's also removed from L1 and L2. But how is this relevant to Flush and Reload? So Flush and Reload is primarily focused in the L3 cache, and L3 is shared across all cores. So that's what makes this so dangerous. So memory duplication and page sharing. What is it? Operating systems share identical memory pages between processes or virtual machines to reduce memory usage. So instead of storing multiple copies on the same data, the system merges them into a single shared page. So if a process modifies a shared page, a copy on write mechanism creates a private copy and moves it over. Why is this a security risk, though? When memory pages are shared, an attacker can monitor access patterns to detect when a victim processes uses a specific memory location. And this is essentially what Flush and Reload exploits. The attacker flushes a shared memory page from the cache, and if the victim accesses it, the attacker sees a faster reload time, revealing the usage patterns. This allows attackers to extract crypto keys or spy on processes in certain cloud virtual machines. Some real world examples would be in real life cloud environments, multiple VMs often share the same memory pages, which is very common in libraries. Also, an attacker can rent a virtual machine and monitor shared pages to steal sensitive data from the VM. So, how could you defend against this? You can disable memory duplication in virtual environments. You can use constant time cryptographic implementations where you immediately get your key, or you can just restrict access to cache flushing instructions like CL_FLUSH, which is talked about in this paper. So let's talk about the current cache attacks and their limitations. So we have 3 different main cache attacks that we can look at. Prime plus probe, which an attacker fills a cache set with their own data, then waits for the victim to run, then checks which lines were evicted. And the limitation on this attack is that there's no direct access to the victim's memory, so it has lower accuracy of working. Next, we have evict plus time, which measures the execution time of the victim's operation before and after evicting each cache line. So the limitation on this one requires precise timing and noisy results. So you don't always know the exact time and what they did on each execution line. And lastly, we have FLUSH+FLUSH, which uses the CL function we talked about, the CL_FLUSH instruction, and measures execution time instead of reloading data. So the limitation on this one is it's less reliable in some environments compared to FLUSH+RELOAD. So why are these attacks limited? Many require the same core execution, so attacker and victim on the same CPU core, which is very unlikely. Also, there's a lot of high false positive rates due to caching noises and process scheduling. Also, some depend on attacker controlling execution time, so schedule manipulations on when to attack and when not to. So why do you think attackers would prefer an attack like FLUSH+RELOAD over these older attack caches? Also, before we get into the next slide, maybe we talk about why flush and reload is different. So flush and reload is different than these other attacks because it works across different cores using shared pages. With this, we have higher accuracy since it detects exact memory lines accessed by the victim. And this can be performed across virtual machines. So we can load into a VM and attack someone else's VMs. So that's a little bit why this attack is better than the prior attacks. So we spoke a little bit about flush and reload, but we haven't really gotten in depth into it. So what is FLUSH+RELOAD? FLUSH+RELOAD is a cache-side attack that exploits shared memory pages between the attacker and victim, and it uses the CL_FLUSH instruction to evict a specific memory line from all cache levels. So it measures the reload time needed to detect whether the victim accessed the memory or not. So looking here at the diagram, we can go into a little bit of a step-by-step action of what's going on. So essentially, the first step is flushing. So the attacker evicts a targeted cache line using CL_FLUSH. Then we wait. We wait for the victim to process the execution. Then we reload and measure. The attacker accesses the memory. So fast access would mean that the victim used the memory, so we get a cache hit. Slow access would mean that the victim did not use it, and we get a cache miss. Then we repeat. This process is repeated to trace the execution patterns that our victim is doing. Now, why is FLUSH+RELOAD so powerful? We have high accuracy. Detections across can access specific memory lines, unlike older attacks. It works across different cores as well, so attackers don't need to share the same execution core as the victim. And then there's cross VM compatibility, so we can attack different VM machines while on a VM. Now let's talk more about cache timing attacks. So what are cache timing attacks? So cache timing attacks exploit differences in how long it takes to access data in cache versus main memory. So faster access, the data was cached and it was just used by the victim. So it's upfront and it's right there. Slower access means the data was not evicted, so it wasn't used by the victim directly. Types of cache timing attacks are access-based attacks, which monitor memory access times directly, and eviction-based attacks, which force victims' data out of the cache and analyze reload times. So why does this matter for flush and reload? Flush and reload relies entirely on timing measurements to infer secret information. Modern CPUs make this attack even more effective due to large shared L3 caches. Like, for example, my CPU is a 3D model, so it focuses heavily on L3 cache memory. So for my personal CPU, if someone would do an attack like this, I wouldn't stand a chance, personally. Now, why target RSA? RSA encryption relies on private keys, which must remain secret. RSA uses square and multiply during decryption and signing, which has predictable memory access patterns. If an attacker can track which operations occur, they can recover the key instantly. So, how does the attack work on GNU PG, which is an open source RSA implementation? So the attacker monitors specific memory lines by placing probes in the RSA implementation. Then, FLUSH+RELOAD tracks square and multiply operations, which reveals the sequence of operations. Then, we extract bits of the secret key. Since each multiply corresponds to a 1 in the key, the attacker reconstructs the entire private key bit by bit. Then, the key recovery. With enough observations, the full key can be extracted bit by bit. So, the effectiveness of this attack, what is it? Around 97% of RSA key bits recovered in one decryption round. So it works in both single OS and cross virtual machine environments. And the worst case scenario about this is it can still recover 90% of key bits. So why is FLUSH+RELOAD dangerous? Essentially, it breaks cryptographic security, so it allows extraction of private encrypted keys used methods like RSA. Single attack rounds can leak 90% of key bits, and eventually they can get everything. So this threatens multi-tenant cloud environments, so attacks that work across virtual machines, cloud providers such as AWS, Azure, Google Cloud are at risk if page duplication is enabled. It also works without elevated privileges, so an attacker only needs to access shared memory pages, which is not root and admin privileges. So you can be a user on your computer, not an admin, and be able to do this. Standard user mode applications can execute this attack as well. So it's stealthy and hard to detect, which leaves no direct traces in logs or system calls, and operates at the micro architectural level, making it difficult to monitor by anyone. So, potential beyond cryptography could be used to spy on keystrokes, so seeing what exactly the victim types, network activity, or sensitive computations. Other applications such as password managers, authentication mechanisms, and financial data processes are also at risk. What do you think future processors should do to prevent these kinds of attacks? Because it sounds like our new processors are most at risk for this attack. So, lastly, what are some flaws with the flush and reload? So, first we have dependency on shared memory. So, this attack requires the attacker and victim to share memory pages such as shared libraries or duplicate pages. This dependency limits the applicability of the attack to scenarios where such shared memory is present. Next, we have mitigation through constant time implementations. Cryptographic algorithms implemented in a constant time manner can mitigate the effectiveness of flush plus reload attacks by ensuring that the execution time and memory access platforms are uniform. These implementations reduce the side channel information that the attack relies on. So now we have countermeasures in modern systems. So a little bit what I said about how modern processors might be especially susceptible to this attack. So we have cache partitioning, which isolates cache resources between processes to prevent cross-processing interference. Then we have cache flushing, which regularly clears cache content to reduce the window of opportunity for attacks. Then we have to disable page duplication, which prevents the sharing of identical memory pages between these processes. So these are some countermeasures we could do with our modern CPUs. These can significantly reduce the feasibility and effectiveness of flush reload attacks. So, requirement for high resolution timers. The attack relies on precise timing measurements to distinguish between cache hits and misses. If the system restricts access to high resolution timers or introduction noises to timing measurements, the accuracy of the attack can be diminished. Limited to specific architectures, flush and reload is particularly effective on architectures where the CL flush instruction is available and where shared memory pages are commonly used. Its applicability may be limited onto architectures without these characteristics. And lastly, potential for detection. The repeated flushing and reloading of cache lines can create detectable patterns of cache misses and memory accesses. Advanced monitoring tools can potentially identify these patterns, leading to the detection of the attack. So in summary, the flush and reload attack isn't that powerful under certain conditions, though it is affected when constrained by dependencies on your shared memory, susceptibility, modern countermeasures, and potential detectabilities. So, in conclusion, we've explored the flush reload attack, as well the background needed for it, a high resolution, low noise, cache side channel technique that can extract sensitive data from victim processes, including cryptographic keys. We've started with an overview of side channel attacks, highlighting how modern CPUs inadvertently leak information through caches. We then examined how CPUs, caching, and memory duplication create opportunities for attackers, making shared L3 caches particularly vulnerable to this attack. We compared flush plus reload to older cache attacks, showing why it's more precise and effective across different CPU cores and virtualized environments. We then broke down the step-by-step of how the attack works, demonstrating how attackers can exploit cache timing differences to spy on execution patterns. We also saw how this method has been successfully used to recover RSA encryption keys with alarming accuracy of 97%. However, Flush and Reload has its limitations, like we talked about. It relies on shared memory pages, which can be mitigated by constant time cryptography and increasingly countered by modern security defenses like cache partoning and disability memory duplication. Ultimately, this attack underscores a critical challenge in modern computing. Performance optimizations often introduce new security risks as we move forward. It is critical for researchers and hardware designers to develop stronger countermeasures against cache-based side-channel attacks to protect sensitive information. Do you think future CPU designs should prioritize performance at the risk of security, or should security always come first, even if it means sacrificing speed? Thank you for your time, and have a good day.